The cashier said the total twice. Not because Eun-Ae hadn't heard it the first time, but because the silence afterward was heavy enough to need filling. Eun-Ae stood at the counter with her daughter tied securely against her chest, the soft weight of the baby pressing warm and familiar beneath her jacket. One arm supported the tiny back instinctively as she stared at the glowing numbers on the register. Subscribe and turn on notifications, and drop a comment on where you're watching from and what time it is there, because the what's next might be the one that stays with you. Now back to the story. She counted the bills in her hand. Once. Then again. Slower. Hoping the numbers might change if she was careful enough. They didn't. She was short. Not by much. Just enough to hurt. Behind her the line shifted. Someone cleared their throat. Her daughter stirred against her, a small restless sound escaping her lips. Eun-Ae lowered her head immediately, pressing her cheek gently to the baby's hair. "Shh, it's okay," she whispered, rocking slightly on her feet the way she always did. The baby settled, trusting completely. The can of baby milk sat on the counter between her and the cashier. Bright, necessary, too expensive. The brand the doctor insisted on. The one Eun-Ae had stood in the aisle debating for nearly 10 minutes before finally placing it in her basket anyway, convincing herself she'd find a way. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, lifting her eyes to the cashier at last. "Can you take that off?" The cashier blinked. "The milk?" Eun-Ae nodded once. She didn't explain. She had learned that explanations rarely softened moments like this. The cashier reached for the can. That was when her daughter whimpered. Not a cry, just a confused sound, like she sensed something was wrong without understanding why. Eun-Ae's chest tightened painfully. She adjusted the cloth sling, one hand rubbing small circles over her daughter's back. "It's okay," she murmured. "Mama's here." Someone behind her sighed audibly. Heat crept up Eun-Ae's neck, but she didn't turn around. She focused on keeping her breathing steady, on staying upright, on finishing this without breaking. "Wait." The voice came from behind her, calm, clear, unhurried. The cashier froze mid-motion. Eun-Ae turned halfway, startled. A man had stepped out of line. He didn't look irritated. He didn't look curious either. He wore a dark coat, simple but unmistakably expensive, and his expression was composed in a way that made the noise of the store feel distant. "I'll pay for it," he said. "All of it." Eun-Ae shook her head immediately. "No, you don't have to." "I know," he replied gently. "I want to." Her grip tightened around the edge of the counter. "Please," she said, her voice firm now. "I can manage." He didn't argue. He simply met her eyes. There was no pity there, no judgment, just a quiet certainty that made her protest falter in her throat. The cashier looked between them. "Sir?" He nodded once. Yes. The register beeped as the items were scanned back in. The milk, the bread, the egg she'd already planned to return next. The total climbed. Eun-Ae watched it like it might accuse her of something. When the payment went through, the sound was final. The man stepped back, already turning away as if the moment required nothing more. "Wait," Eun-Ae said before she could stop herself. He paused. Her voice caught. She swallowed. "Thank you. Thank you." He inclined his head slightly. "You're welcome." That was all. No lecture, no advice, no lingering. Eun-Ae gathered the bags carefully, adjusting her daughter against her chest before walking out of the store. Outside, the air was cooler. Her daughter had gone quiet again, small fingers curled against Eun-Ae's collar. She pressed the can of milk briefly against her heart, breathing in, steadying herself. She told herself it was just a stranger, a moment, nothing more. Across the parking lot, Kang Jun-ho stood beside his car, keys forgotten in his hand. He watched the young woman secure her baby more tightly against her chest before walking away. Watched the way she moved, careful, protective, already calculating what came next. It wasn't the money that stayed with him. It was the look on her face when she let go of the milk. He had seen that look before, and no matter where the day took him afterward, it followed him, quiet, unresolved, and impossible to ignore. The milk was paid for, but the story was only just beginning. Kang Joon-ho had already forgotten the meeting by the time it ended. The figures on the screen blurred together. Voices droned. Someone laughed at a joke he didn't hear. He nodded at the right moments out of habit, signed where he was told, stood when everyone else stood. But his mind was somewhere else. It kept returning to a grocery store aisle that smelled faintly of disinfectant and baby powder. To a woman standing too straight for someone who was about to give something up. To the way her arms had tightened instinctively around her child when she realized she couldn't afford the milk. He had seen fear before. He had seen desperation. What he hadn't expected was restraint. In the car, his driver asked where to next. Joon-ho paused, then said, "Home." The word felt heavier than usual. That night, his daughter sat cross-legged on the living room floor, pushing toy cars back and forth while a cartoon played softly in the background. She looked up when he entered, eyes bright. "Daddy," she said, smiling. "Did you eat?" He stopped short. "Yes," he lied easily, then corrected himself. "No, not yet." She frowned, climbed to her feet, and dragged a small plastic plate toward him. "You can have mine." The simplicity of it hit him harder than it should have. He knelt down, brushing her hair back gently. "I'm okay," he said. "You eat." She studied him the way children sometimes do, as if they see more than adults expect. Then she nodded and returned to her food. Later, after she'd fallen asleep, Joon-ho sat alone at the kitchen counter, staring at nothing. The image came back again. A young mother, a baby pressed to her chest, a can of milk sliding away across a counter. He closed his eyes. He hadn't stepped forward because he was generous. He hadn't done it because he was rich. He had done it because... For a split second, he was no longer a man in a tailored coat. He was a boy again, standing beside his own mother as she quietly asked the cashier to remove an item. Watching her smile like it didn't matter. Watching her turn away before anyone could see her face. He exhaled slowly. The past had a way of resurfacing when you least expected it. The next morning, he asked his assistant for something unusual. "Find me employment programs we fund," he said, "especially ones connected to women and families." His assistant blinked. "Are you looking to expand donations?" "No," Joon-ho replied. "I'm looking for sustainability." That word stayed with him all day. Money could fix one moment. Stability fixed a life. Somewhere across the city, Eun-Ae adjusted the sling on her shoulder and counted the milk scoops carefully, making sure she didn't waste a single one. She told herself she'd forget the stranger by morning. She didn't, and neither did he. Whatever that moment had been, it hadn't ended at the checkout counter. It had only begun. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment below. We love to see how far this story's travel of. Eun-Ae almost ignored the call. Unknown numbers usually meant trouble. Late bills, wrong connections, reminders she wasn't ready to face. She stared at the screen while her daughter slept against her chest, warm and heavy, her breathing slow and even. The phone buzzed again. She answered quietly. "Hello? Ms. Park?" The woman on the line sounded professional. Polite. "I'm calling from JH Holdings. We received your application and would like to invite you for an interview." Eun-Ae sat up straighter. "My application?" "Yes, for the administrative support role." Her heart began to pound. She didn't remember applying there. She barely remembered applying anywhere beyond the small agencies that rarely called back. But she wrote everything down. Date, time, address, her hand trembling slightly as she thanked the caller. After the call ended, she stared at the wall for a long moment. Then she shook her head. Coincidence, she told herself. It had to be. 2 days later, she stood outside a glass building that rose higher than anything she'd ever worked in. She adjusted the strap of the baby carrier across her chest, smoothing her jacket with her free hand. "You're okay," she whispered to her daughter. "Just wait with Auntie for a bit." Handing the baby over at the daycare downstairs felt like tearing something loose from her chest, but she forced herself to walk away without looking back. Inside, everything gleamed: marble floors, soft lighting, voices lowered to a careful hush. She gave her name at the desk and was directed upstairs. The interview room door opened. Eun-Ae stepped in and stopped. The man seated at the table looked up at the same time. It was him. The grocery store, the dark coat, the calm eyes. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Eun-Ae began, then stopped herself. Her cheeks burned. "I didn't come because of that day." "I know," Kang Jun-ho said immediately. His voice was the same, calm, even. He gestured to the chair across from him. "Please, sit." Her legs felt unsteady as she obeyed. The interview proceeded like any other. He asked about her experience, her availability, her willingness to learn. She answered carefully, choosing her words the way she always did when something felt fragile. He didn't mention the supermarket, not once. When it ended, she stood quickly, bowing slightly. "Thank you for your time." "Ms. Park," he said, stopping her. She turned. "I hope whatever happens today," he continued, "you don't feel obligated. This has nothing to do with charity." Her throat tightened. "I wouldn't accept it if it did." His gaze held hers for a moment longer than necessary. Then he nodded. "That's exactly what I wanted to hear." As she left the room, Eun-Ae's thoughts tangled into something she couldn't name. And behind her, Kang Jun-ho remained seated, watching the door long after it closed. The milk had brought them into the same room, but what happened next would decide what it meant. Eun-Ae didn't hear back immediately. She told herself that was normal. Interviews took time. Decisions were made behind doors she had never been allowed near. Still, each time her phone vibrated, her heart jumped before settling back into disappointment. She kept busy. Days were measured in small, careful routines: washing bottles, folding laundry, rocking her daughter through restless nights. The milk can on the counter grew lighter with every scoop. She marked the days on a calendar in her head, calculating how long it would last. Across the city, Kang Jun-ho sat alone in his office, long after the building had emptied. The interview replayed itself in his mind. Not the answers she'd given, but the way she'd said them. Steady, unapologetic, as if she'd learned long ago that the world listened only when you spoke carefully. He opened a drawer he rarely touched. Inside lay an old photograph, edges worn soft from handling. A younger woman stood in it, thinner than he remembered, her expression tired but determined. His mother. He remembered standing beside her in a small shop years ago, watching her count money the same way Eun-Ae had. Watching her return a packet of food she'd promised him. Watching her smile as if nothing had been lost. No one had stepped forward that day. He had never forgotten. The next morning, he called his assistant. "Prepare an offer," he said. "Fair salary, clear hours. No temporary contract." There was a pause on the line. "Is this for a specific candidate?" "Yes," Jun-ho replied. "And make it clear she owes us nothing." When Eun-Ae received the email, she read it 3 times to make sure she hadn't misunderstood. The role was stable. The pay was more than she'd ever earned. The hours were fixed. She closed her eyes and pressed her palm briefly to her chest. This wasn't rescue. She knew that. It was opportunity. Still, the line between the two felt thin. That evening, she sat on the floor beside her daughter, watching her grip a soft toy in her tiny hands. "It's just work," Eun-Ae murmured, more to herself than to the baby. "We'll take it one day at a time." Somewhere not far away, Kang Joon-ho stood at his window, city lights stretching endlessly below. For the first time in years, he felt certain about a decision. Not because it made sense on paper, but because it felt right. And neither of them yet understood how deeply that choice would bind their paths together. Eun-Ae showed up early on her first day. Too early, really. The building wasn't fully awake yet, and the lobby smelled faintly of polish and fresh coffee. She adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder, taking a steadying breath before stepping inside. This wasn't a favor. This wasn't charity. She reminded herself of that with every step. The orientation passed quietly. Paperwork, a brief tour, a desk that wasn't hers yet, but would be if she proved herself. No one mentioned the interview. No one mentioned the grocery store. By mid-morning, she was given her first task, organizing files for an executive meeting scheduled later that week. When she reached the floor listed on the folder, her stomach tightened. Executive offices. She hesitated only a second before walking in. Kang Joon-ho looked up from his desk when she entered. For a moment, neither of them spoke. This time, there was no counter between them. No line of waiting customers. Just quiet space and unspoken awareness. "You didn't have to assign me here," Eun-Ae said before she could stop herself. He leaned back slightly, hands folded. "You're qualified." She shook her head. "That's not what I mean." Silence stretched. "I won't accept special treatment," she said firmly. "If this job exists because of pity, I'll leave now." Joon-ho's gaze sharpened. Not with irritation, but with respect. "Then, stay," he replied calmly. Because pity had nothing to do with it. She studied his face, searching for hesitation. She found none. "Work hours are fixed," he continued. "Your responsibilities are clear. You answer to your supervisor, not to me. If at any point this feels uncomfortable, you walk away." Eun-Ae exhaled slowly. "Good," she said. "That's how it has to be." He nodded once, as if she'd just confirmed something he'd already suspected. As she turned back to the files, she felt the tension in the room ease, not disappear, but settle into something manageable. Across the office, Joon-ho watched her work in silence. She moved with focus. No wasted motion, no attempt to be noticed. Exactly the kind of person power often overlooked. And for the first time since the supermarket, he understood something clearly. Helping her once had been instinct. Respecting her boundaries now was a choice, one he intended to keep. Eun-Ae tried to pretend everything was normal. She learned the systems quickly. She stayed late when asked. She kept her head down and did her work with the same quiet focus she brought to everything else in her life. To anyone watching, she was just another new hire trying to keep her footing. But gratitude is a complicated thing. It sat in her chest like a weight she hadn't asked for. Every time she passed the executive floor, every time she caught sight of Kang Joon-ho through glass walls or across a conference room, it tightened. She didn't want to owe him anything. Not her loyalty, not her silence, not her future. One afternoon, her supervisor stopped by her desk. "You're doing well," she said, surprised. "Very well." Eun-Ae nodded, accepting the words without relief. Praise didn't change the rules she lived by. Later that day, she found herself alone in the break room. Warming soup she'd brought from home. The microwave hummed. The room smelled faintly of coffee and paper. You don't use the cafeteria? A voice said behind her. She turned. Kang Joon-ho stood in the doorway, his jacket off, sleeves rolled up like any other employee finishing a long day. I prefer my own food, Eun-Ae replied carefully. He nodded. I thought you might. The silence that followed felt different from before. Less charged, more honest. I want to be clear, she said suddenly, the words spilling out before she could soften them. I'm grateful for that day, for this job, but I won't live as someone who's being watched or managed. He met her gaze steadily. You aren't. You could, she pressed. You have the power to. Yes, he said simply, and I choose not to. That answer unsettled her more than any denial would have. She turned back to the microwave, retrieving her soup when it beeped. I won't always agree with you, she said quietly. I wouldn't trust you if you did, he replied. She glanced at him, surprised despite herself. For the first time, she saw something shift in his expression. Not authority, not distance, respect. As she left the room, Eun-Ae realized something she hadn't allowed herself to consider before. Gratitude didn't have to turn into submission, and if she stayed, it would be on her terms, or not at all. Across the room, Kang Joon-ho watched her go. Aware that whatever this was becoming, it was no longer something he controlled, and for reasons he couldn't yet explain, that felt exactly right. The call came late at night. Kang Joon-ho was still in his office, city lights reflecting off the glass like distant stars, when his assistant's voice broke the silence. Sir, your daughter's school called. She refused dinner again. He closed his eyes briefly. I'll be there. At home, his daughter sat curled on the couch, arms wrapped around a stuffed toy. She didn't look up when he entered. You didn't eat, he said gently. I wasn't hungry, she replied, too quickly. He crouched in front of her, lowering himself to her level. That's not true. She frowned, eyes filling. You said we shouldn't waste food, but my friend said her mommy can't buy snacks anymore. Something tightened in his chest. He remembered another night, another small living room, his own mother standing at the sink, turning her face away as she scraped food back into a pot that was already empty. He remembered asking if she was hungry and hearing the same lie. I already ate. He sat beside his daughter now, pulling her close. Food isn't just food, he said quietly. Sometimes it's fear, sometimes it's pride, and sometimes it's love. She leaned into him, trusting without needing to understand. Later, after she slept, Joon-ho stood alone on the balcony. The city hummed below, indifferent and endless. He thought of Eun-Ae, of the way she refused to bend, the way she protected her child without complaint. Helping her once had been instinct. Letting her stand on her own had been harder. He understood now why he couldn't interfere further, why he had to let her decide every step forward. Power could repair a moment. It couldn't replace dignity. Across the city, Eun-Ae rocked her daughter gently, humming a tune her own mother used to sing. She didn't know what Joon-ho carried with him into the night, only that something between them had shifted, quietly, irreversibly, and that the choices ahead would demand honesty from them both. Eun-Ae noticed the distance before she understood it. Kang Joon-ho stopped appearing in places where he didn't need to be. He didn't linger near her desk. He didn't find reasons to pass by. Meetings happened without him. Decisions came through proper channels, exactly as promised. It should have made things easier. Instead, the absence felt loud. She told herself it was relief, that this was how it was supposed to be. Clear lines, clean boundaries, work that stayed work. Gratitude that didn't turn into obligation. But some evenings, as she walked home with her daughter pressed warm against her chest, she caught herself wondering if distance was just another kind of protection. One afternoon, her supervisor called her into a small office. "We're expanding a community outreach project," she said. "Mr. Kang suggested you might be a good fit." Eun-Ae's heart stuttered. "Suggested?" "Yes, but the decision is yours, completely." She nodded slowly. "I'll think about it." That night, she sat on the floor beside her sleeping daughter, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest. The milk can was almost empty again. This time, she didn't panic. The numbers still mattered, but fear no longer sat beside them. She thought of the space Eun-Ae had given her, how carefully he'd stepped back, how power, when restrained, could feel like respect instead of threat. The next morning, she sent a short message. "I'd like to hear more about the project." The reply came quickly. "Whenever you're ready." They met not in an office, but in a small conference room with the blinds half drawn. No assistance, no urgency. "I didn't recommend you because of the supermarket," he said first, "or because of your child." "Good," Eun-Ae replied. "Then we understand each other." He nodded, a faint smile touching his lips before disappearing again. As the meeting ended, neither of them rushed to stand. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was careful, considered. Eun-Ae realized something then. Distance hadn't been rejection. It had been restraint. And for the first time, she wondered, not with fear, but with clarity, what it might mean to choose what came next, instead of only surviving it. The decision didn't come all at once. Eun-Ae carried it with her through ordinary moments, washing bottles in the sink, folding laundry late at night, counting the last scoops of milk with practiced care. It sat quietly in the back of her mind, waiting for her to be ready. When she finally spoke, it wasn't dramatic. "I'll take the role," she said during their next meeting, "but I need to be clear about something." Kang Eun-Ae looked up from the documents in front of him. "Go on." "I won't be a symbol," she continued, her voice steady. "Not for generosity, not for redemption. I don't want my story used to make anyone feel better about power." He listened without interrupting. "And if any point this stops being about the work," she added, "I walk away. No explanations." He nodded slowly. "That's fair." She exhaled, some tension loosening in her chest. "Then we're aligned." The work itself surprised her. It wasn't performative. It wasn't about press releases or staged compassion. It was logistics, planning, follow-through, the unglamorous parts of support that actually lasted. She found herself speaking up in meetings, challenging assumptions, insisting on details others overlooked. People listened, not because of who stood behind her, because of what she said. One afternoon, as she reviewed reports with Kang Eun-Ae, she realized something had shifted. He no longer explained decisions to her as if she were a guest. He asked for her opinion as if it mattered. And it did. "I didn't expect this," she admitted quietly. "Neither did I," he replied. "But I'm glad." She looked at him then, not as the man from the supermarket, not as the billionaire whose money had changed a moment, but as someone standing beside her, not ahead of her. That night, she returned home exhausted, but lighter. She held her daughter close, breathing in the familiar warmth, and felt something settle. For the first time in a long while, the future didn't feel like something she had to brace herself against. It felt like something she was allowed to shape. And that choice, hers, fully and without apology, changed the balance between them in a way neither of them could ignore. There was no single moment when everything changed. No dramatic confession. No promise that rewrote the past. Life continued the way it always had, slowly, carefully, in pieces. Eun-Ae settled into her work, finding a rhythm that didn't ask her to disappear or shrink. She went home at the same hour each evening. She cooked simple meals. She rocked her daughter to sleep and whispered the same reassurances into the dark. Kang Joon-ho stayed where he belonged. He didn't hover. He didn't intrude. He didn't mistake access for entitlement. When they spoke, it was direct. When they disagreed, it was honest. When silence came, it was allowed to exist without explanation. One afternoon, as they finished reviewing plans for the next quarter, Eun-Ae gathered her notes and stood to leave. "Stay," he said, not as an order, but as a question. She hesitated. Then she sat back down. They didn't talk about the supermarket, or the milk, or the way everything had begun. Some stories didn't need to be revisited to be understood. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent and alive. Eun-Ae looked at him, not as the man who had paid for milk, not as the billionaire whose presence once felt overwhelming, but as someone who had learned to step back and wait. "I don't know what this becomes," she said. "I don't either," Kang Joon-ho replied. "But I'm not in a hurry." That mattered. When she reached for his hand, it was deliberate, not an acceptance of everything that came before, not forgiveness wrapped in romance. A choice. He didn't tighten his grip. He didn't pull her closer. He simply held her hand the way you hold something fragile, with care and without claim. Later that evening, Eun-Ae walked home with her daughter resting against her chest, the city lights soft around them. The milk can on the counter was full again, this time without fear attached to it. The world hadn't become kinder overnight, but it had become steadier, and sometimes that was enough. The story didn't end with a miracle. It ended with something better: truth, respect, and a future built slowly by choice. Please like, subscribe, and drop a comment on what kind of story you want me to create next. For more of this kind of stories, click on any of the stories on your screen.